Hello and welcome to the third and final video in the Be the Difference training series. I hope you've learned a lot from the previous two videos about reading and figuring out what our struggling readers need. Now this video right here is the exciting part. It's where you learn the actions that you need to take to be the difference for your struggling readers. So let's dive in. In video number 1, we learned where our struggling readers should be on that path of typical reading. In video number 2, we found out why some of our readers fall off of that path. And now in this last video, we're going to talk about what we can do to get your struggling readers back on that path and headed to success. So there's some very awesome things that we can do to help our struggling readers, but before we talk about what does work, we need to talk about what doesn't work. Now, don't worry if you've used some of these techniques. They can be just fine for a lot of students, but our struggling readers need something different to overcome their obstacles. So let's start off with the do nots of reading intervention. Number 1, do not teach students to read like struggling readers. Teach them how to read like good readers instead. One common teaching method to use is when students are reading and come across a word they don't know, the teacher might give several prompts such as, look at the picture and see if you can guess what the word is. Or, look at the first sound in the word and see if you can guess what the word is. Or, think about what makes sense and see if you can guess what the word is. Or skip the word, read the rest of the sentence, and then go back and guess what the word might be. Can you see a pattern? There's a lot of guessing going on. There's a lot of relying on context. There's a lot of looking at other places besides looking at the actual word. These techniques are really tempting to use because they are a quick fix. They let the student read that specific text and kind of say the right words, but really it's more of a band-aid approach. It does not address the root of the problem. Those words that the students are guessing will not be stored in their sight vocabulary just by guessing the word. In fact, most of the time when they guess, they are not even looking at the whole word. So the next time they come across that word, it will not be in their store of sight words, and they'll just have to guess again. So guessing may be a short-term solution to get students to read a specific text, but it will never get students caught up to their typically developing peers who are already reading so much and growing so fast. The way to get students caught up is to get them to read like good readers, like those kids we are trying to get them caught up to. Those typically developing readers are following the normal path. When they're reading, if they come across a word they don't know, they use phonetic decoding to sound the word out. Then they recognize the word that those sounds make, and they use orthographic mapping to connect the sounds in that word to the letters. They pay attention to the word. So, we do not want to teach guessing. We want to teach paying attention to the word and sounding it out, which can be a struggle for some students, but there are things that you can practice with them that give them the skills to make decoding easier. The second do not is to not rely on just exposure and having struggling students naturally learn how to read by themselves. This approach can sometimes work for typical students, but it will not work for struggling readers. Struggling readers need explicit instruction, and they need to be built up in those skills that will make them a better reader. Our instruction for struggling readers needs to be intentional, systematic, and purposeful. Relying on exposure alone reinforces bad habits and keeps students floundering, unable to progress until they receive the support that they need. The last do not is to not keep doing the same thing over and over again if it's not working for your student. Something needs to change. It's not always the entire method that needs a complete overhaul, but there are many factors to look at. First, you might need to change the amount of time you're working with a student. They might need more time or more intervention, or maybe they need shorter intervals of intervention sessions throughout the day so that they don't lose focus. Next, you might need to change the intensity of interventions. So, cutting out the fluff and getting straight to business, targeting exactly what skills they need the most help in, and giving them a lot of practice in it. And last, you might need to change the strategy you are using. There are definitely more effective strategies out there than others, and you need to find what works best for your students. So now we have an idea of some of the things that we should not be doing. So teaching guessing, relying on students learning naturally just through exposure, and doing the same things over and over again if they're not working. We also touched on some of the things we should be doing instead, like teaching readers to read like good readers do, using explicit and systematic instruction, and change things up if they're not working. Now I wanted to get into a little bit of how to actually apply this in real life, and also stress to you the importance of getting these students the help they need as quickly as possible. As explained by David Kilpatrick in his book Assessing, Preventing, and Overcoming Reading Difficulties, there are two methods for helping our at-risk and struggling readers. We have prevention and intervention. Prevention is for our pre-readers. We're talking preschool, kindergarten, and the first half of first grade. The idea here is to give our students all the skills that they will need to be good readers before everyone starts reading, before their peers start to get ahead of them. In his book, Kilpatrick likes to give the analogy of a race to describe the idea of prevention. Imagine several kids lined up at the start of a race. Some of the kids have a normal, clear path to run, but there are a few kids that have hurdles in their lanes. You can imagine that the kids running with hurdles in their lanes will be much slower than the students running with clear lanes. As the race continues, the hurdle runners will fall further and further behind as the clear path runners continue to race forward. But what if we removed those hurdles from the very start of the race? What if we took away those hurdles before they even started slowing down the racers? The students would be on a much fairer racing ground, and they would all likely reach the finish line at a much closer time. When we have effective prevention, we take away those hurdles. This way, when reading does develop around mid-first grade, students are so strong in the skills that make them good readers that they will develop right along with their typically developing peers. This is essentially preventing the gap from ever forming in the first place, and this is ideal. But we don't always catch these at-risk readers in time. Sometimes we will need intervention. Intervention takes place after reading starts being taught, usually around mid-first grade and on. Intervention is identifying the students that are falling behind and catching them up. So we need to find those students who are not growing as fast as they should be, and we need to close the gap. Now, let's talk about that gap. The time we switch from prevention to intervention is around the time that the gap between your proficient readers and your struggling readers starts to form. Once your typical readers start reading, they will grow exponentially. The more they read, the better they get. And the better they get, the more they will want to read. So we have our typically developing readers growing at a very rapid pace. But then you have your struggling readers getting stuck at the very beginning. If they're making any growth at all, it will usually be much slower, and so the gap is getting bigger and bigger. The longer this goes on and the older the kids are by the time we address this gap, the bigger the gap gets. The more it feels like an impossible to cross chasm. This is why prevention is so essential to preventing that gap from even forming. Even after the prevention period has passed, addressing reading problems quickly can help minimize the distance you have to close between your struggling readers and your proficient readers. Let's be real. I know as a teacher, time is precious to you, and you do not have a lot of it to waste. You need your interventions to be as efficient as possible. You need to be using the strategies that are going to make the biggest difference, and you need to be targeting exactly the right skills that your students actually need. Now, you've made it through 3 videos and you have learned a lot. But after all of this, I want you to truly feel better equipped to bridge that gap. So, I have a game-changing tool that I'm going to share with you right now to help you do exactly that. I present to you the Bridge the Gap Reading Guide. This guide will help you bridge that gap and know where to focus your interventions. It gives you all of the basic areas you need to focus on to develop reading proficiency. It follows the typical reader's path to reading that we discussed in video 1 and aligns with the simple view of reading formula we talked about in video 2. In most cases, you will want to start targeting word reading skills first. You start with building phonemic awareness and phonics skills together, and then those will work together to help build fluency through that key we talked about, orthographic mapping. Now, if students are having language comprehension struggles as well, you will want to focus on strengthening vocabulary, building and providing plenty of background knowledge, and then equipping students with comprehension strategies that will help them digest and understand what they're reading better. This path focuses on what truly makes a difference in reading intervention, and you can download it down below in the download section. Now, these videos, they're just the tip of the iceberg. There's really so much more that you can do to be a difference maker teacher. I would absolutely love to continue on your journey with you to help you be that teacher that makes a difference in a struggling reader's life. So, visit my blog, grab my reading intervention course, pick up some no prep reading resources at my TPT store, or subscribe and find more reading videos on my channel. I'll see you difference makers there.